festival. We call it the King of Festivals. It is celebrated this year from April 20th until May 1st. And this actually changes year by year depending on Nowruz, which is the Bahá'í New Year that is on the first day of spring. So with that being said, I would check your calendar the year that you're celebrating just to make sure it's on the 20th or the 21st that it starts. But we're in the middle section at this point. It's April 21st, so it surely would be any day to celebrate Rizwan. That being said, we welcome all of you here as we're going to be speaking on a special topic today. And not just that, we want to welcome all of you who have just come to our page or visiting for the first time. We hope you can visit clearwaterbaha'is.org to learn more about the different sessions we offer. We have activities and events, and they occur throughout the week. We welcome you to check them out. We will have another activity after this one at 2 p.m. We are welcoming with us a returning speaker, Mr. Wade Franson. He is the author of a successful trilogy and the founder of Something or Other Publishing, which utilizes social media and publishing to provide flexible author-driven publishing services. He is a former worldwide Church of God minister with an undergraduate degree in theology. And to add to that, he has an MBA. His diverse background includes having lived in 7 countries, learning 5 languages, consulting with major corporations with Deloitte Consulting, and managing large technology negotiations for Kohl's department stores. Wade's involvement in the community involves serving the board of the Madison Community Montessori School and chairperson of the Virtues Project International Association Board of Directors. In 2014, he received a Lifetime Achievement Award from the Association of Soft Skills Trainers in Chennai, India. Today, Wade is a Baha'i living with his wife, 2 children, 2 cats, and not to add more, but there is more, 2 chickens and a rooster in Brooklyn, Wisconsin. The topic today is pretty important, but before we get to the topic, there's a special shout out we want to give from one of the people publishing with Soup LLC. I've pasted the link in the Zoom chat. This is for our previous speaker, Ms. Eileen Maddox. There is a legacy offer available for the books that have been published, the Coming of the Glory series, as well as Convergence of Prophecy. There are actual subjects that we've had discussed on these issues, these books, in previous Clearwater Bahá'ís sessions, which we welcome you to all check out after this session. The Coming of the Glory, the trilogy plus Convergence of Prophecy, there's a 25% off offer if you want to check it out. The link is in the chat. And there's also an extra 5% discount for Clearwater Bahá'ís viewers, such as yourself, by entering Clearwater 5 and clicking enter to validate before paying. You will get an extra 5% discount on top of the offer that we have with the link that we've provided in the chat. And Jeremiah will be posting that in the comments section or the video description. So please be sure to look at that if you're on YouTube and on Facebook. But give us about a day or 2 after this is published, please. With that being said, we welcome all of you to check out those books, as Wade Franson and helping to publish these books cares that all of us are able to have access to various Baha'i authors that are trying to promulgate the word in one sense, and in another sense, help promote understanding. So we definitely appreciate that, Wade, you've been able to share that with us. And thank you all of you who have decided to check it out. So with that being said, back to this week's topic. This week's topic is unveiling the prophetic significance of Zechariah 4 and its fulfillment in Baha'i teachings. This presentation, it explores the profound connections between the prophetic visions in Zechariah 4 and their fulfillment as interpreted in the Baha'i teachings. We will look at both the literal and spiritual fulfillment of these prophecies. Central to this discussion is the figure of Zerubbabel, likened to Baha'u'llah, who, according to Baha'i belief, emerged from Babylon, or otherwise known as modern-day Iraq, to establish a new divine order. Just a quick plug-in here, the Festival of Rizwan, which we're celebrating around the world as Bahá'ís, it was in Baghdad, Israel, that Baha'u'llah declared his revelation to everyone in the world. So this presentation underscores the significant plumb line in Zerubbabel's hand as a metaphor for justice and divine authority seen in Baha'u'llah's revelation. We will also examine the correlation to the two witnesses in the book of Revelation, identified in Baha'i thought as Muhammad, the manifestation of God, and Ali, the son of Abu Talib. The session aims to provide a general and gradual exploration of these themes, incorporating scripture from the Bible and the Baha'i writings, specifically using some answered questions of Abdul Baha to cater to both seasoned adherents and curious seekers. By viewing the historical and spiritual developments through these lenses, the presentation intends to offer insights into the unity and the continuity of divine guidance across different eras and religious dispensations. With that being said, Wade, Mr. Fran's son, welcome.
Thank you, John, and welcome, dear friends. I guess I would need to open up by asking, have any of you ever bitten off more than you could chew? There is a lot in that introduction, and I have to confess right up front, we will not get through all of it. But we will absolutely explore the profound connections between Zerubbabel, and there are probably different pronunciations, and maybe some of the Persians in the audience would do better than I. But Zerubbabel means out of Babylon, as we'll discover, and there are just so many connections. In that sense, Zechariah 4 is just the tip of one iceberg in an ocean of icebergs of divine revelation. I hope this will be interesting enough today that I'm invited back to further unpack what I will share today, because much of what we cover today will, by necessity, be context and general awareness and general understanding of these different floating icebergs, so that we and our friends are not like the Titanic, crashing into them in a heedless manner, but rather understanding what they really mean and portend, and helping the various ships traversing the ocean maneuver and navigate around these icebergs successfully, and in that sense allow them to melt and become part of the ocean. In that sense, we'll be looking, or trying to look in the time we have allotted, at both literal and spiritual fulfillment of these prophecies. But central to this entire discussion, as was mentioned by John, is the figure of Zerubbabel. The context of this will be to help both Baha'is and those who may be Christian, Jewish, other, or Baha'is who wish to reach and share with those peoples what these prophetic visions mean and how they can be understood and explained and integrated together. So this presentation is both for those who may be Baha'is but may not know the Bible that well, or those who may know the Bible very well but may not know much about Baha'i teachings. So please fully engage, both in terms of listening with an open mind and in the question and answer session at the end. I'd like to start actually by reading two passages from Baha'u'llah's tablet on the birth of the greatest name. And if this goes well, and if I can keep moving quickly through the material, I may just try to share my screen and have some of you read, but in the interest of time and just going quickly, I may just read it myself. And again, in order to provide greater connection to the audience and for speed, I'm not actually going to use PowerPoints. I'm just going to be speaking and reading. So the first two passages here are from Baha'u'llah's tablet on the birth of the greatest name, a tablet that I had never read before, but did so in preparation for this presentation. Say that this night the veils of glory concealing the light of certitude were rent in twain, and the dove of heaven chanted and sang in the midmost heart of paradise. Therefore, rejoice, O temples of holiness, dwelling in the city of time. On this night, God revealed his light through every exalted name. Moreover, he hath been established upon every pure and radiant heart. So rejoice, O people of the Bahá'í. Now, a number of words from this little passage will come into play almost like a refrain, like rhyme, like poetry throughout this presentation. The first thing that comes to mind, perhaps for a number of Christians, is that when Jesus died on the cross, or the stake, if it wasn't a cross, there's some actual discussion as to the exact method of his crucifixion. But when he was crucified, it said the veil in the temple was rent asunder, the veil that separated the people from the Shekinah, the glory of God. And only the high priest in the Jewish religion was allowed to enter the Holy of Holies on the Day of Atonement once per year, and then with blood and sacrifice. But now that veil was ripped in two, providing access to the Shekinah, the glory of glory, to the people, glory of glories, the glory of God. Fascinating when one understands the connections here. But what's interesting is that happened at the death of Jesus. And this is speaking about the birth of Baha'u'llah in similar terms. The veil was rent in twain, the veil concealing the light of certitude. And then also this idea of rejoicing will come into play. And I find it also interesting, O temples, rejoice, O temples of holiness. The temple will come into play. Dwelling in the city of time. My first statement about prophecy is that prophecy is simply history written in advance by God who exists outside of time and space. Prophecy is just very simply history written in advance by the being who sits outside of time and space and who really knows the end from the beginning. But in this same tablet, we have the inverse, the other side of the coin, which is also critically important for this presentation today. By God, the veils have been rent asunder. The dense coverings have been consumed by fire. The abstruse illusions have been unveiled, and the subtle signs have been unraveled by him who is endowed with power and omnipotence. Verily, this bounty is from God, the exalted, the beneficent. Here's that word again, rejoice. But now the context is very different. Rejoice and silently conceal this secret and hidden symbol, lest your foes learn of that which ye have quaffed from this wine of rapturous joy. Verily, this bounty is from God, the exalted, the beneficence. Isn't this interesting and fascinating? We're told to rejoice because the veils have been ripped asunder, and then we're admonished to conceal what has been unveiled. And again, this is really important in terms of understanding the point and the purpose of sharing these perspectives on these prophecies, history written in advance, because everyone is at a different point in time and place and in their understanding. Now, none of the friends here in this meeting are foes, and certainly I don't view anyone as foes. But numerous quotes from Baha'u'llah admonish us to moderation, such as this one from the tablet to Sayyid Midyat-i Dahaji, and my apologies for mangling these names. Utterance must needs possess penetrating power, for if bereft of this quality, it would fail to exert influence. And this penetrating influence dependeth on the spirit being pure and the heart stainless. Likewise, it needeth moderation, without which the hearer would be unable to bear it. Rather, he would manifest opposition from the very outset. And moderation will be obtained by blending utterance with the tokens of divine wisdom, which are recorded in the sacred books and tablets. It may have been here or elsewhere in a presentation. I've shared this story several times about a Persian woman whose ancestors date back to having attained Baha'u'llah's presence, who spent her life, and she was an older woman, spent her life trying to, quote, teach Christians, unquote, quote, and she confessed to me at Greenacre that her life's work had been an utter failure and asked me as a former Christian minister what advice I could give her in how she could achieve greater success. And I shared with her that with her awareness, she could cross the that often with her awareness she tried to pull Christians and others over a line to accept her understanding, a line which they could not cross. But that the answer was she could cross that line easily and to go over to their side of the discussion rather than trying to pull them to her side of the discussion. So, in order to create friends and not foes, this idea of moderation and of concealing, and instead, Abdul Baha, the master, taught that are taught in such a manner that it is said that most of the people he was teaching felt like they were teaching him because he was such a good listener and he could see the good in what they felt, saw, and believed. He saw God in every person, and he asks us to see him, God, Abdul Baha, in every other person and shower them with love and affection. And that love and affection and respect comes from respecting their viewpoints and listening to them and learning what it is that they have to offer. Stephen Covey, in his 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, summed this up by saying, seek first to understand, then to be understood. So we'll explore all of this shortly. This last piece of this, let me reiterate, and moderation will be obtained by blending the utterance with the tokens of divine wisdom which are recorded in the sacred books and tablets. And my point here is this is not just the Baha'i sacred books and tablets, but all the holy writings. Blending utterance with these tokens. And in order to do so, we need to understand them. So I'm going to start by reading a couple of passages from Zechariah with very little explanation and just providing basic context. There will be much left unpacked at the end, and we can hopefully explore these more fully in a parallel series, perhaps one in which we go through the entire books of Haggai and Zechariah. And I have to mention here both Jay Tyson and Eileen Maddox, who was already mentioned, Baha'i authors who have been published with books that really are designed to reach out and to be shared with those who have some interest in the Baha'i faith. They're not simply to be given to any Christian, but once an interest has been expressed, these books are helpful because they do that. And I've had the honor of publishing their works, but I also want to mention Hushadar Motlah, who actually presented one of the very first firesides that I ever attended out in California many years ago. He published 25 or more books before he passed on to the next world a year ago. And many of his books have that same intent. Come, let us reason together, blending the holy writings from various manifestations, Jesus, Moses, and others, to diffuse the fragrance of the teachings of God. Eileen's work in particular comprises several of these icebergs. She covers the entire Old Testament, the Torah, the law, the prophets, and the writings. And her third book is being published tomorrow on the Jewish Passover, on this interesting overlap of Rizvan and Passover. We just had a solar eclipse in which the moon, which I always think of the moon as representing the Jewish faith. I won't unpack that today. I won't explain why. The Jewish faith has a lunar cycle, just like the Muslim faith, although a different calendar. And so when the sun is eclipsed by the moon, it highlights how that can both block, and at the same time, we got out those glasses and we were able to take a look at the sun and the corona around it. Very interesting analogy here. But her book is being published, and you'll have the opportunity to pre-order it here before that pre-order offer expires. All of this is unpacked in great detail in her books. All right, so let's just read from Zechariah 1 here. And in the interest of time, I'm just going to do this because it just would slow things down if I had readers share it, although that would also add an element. Zechariah chapter 1, verses 12 to 17. Zechariah was a prophet in the Hebrew Bible. The rubric at the top of this in various Bibles says, "The Lord will comfort Zion." This is really short. The angel of the Lord answered and said, "O Lord of hosts, how long will you not have mercy on Jerusalem and on the cities of Judah, against which you were angry these 70 years?" And if we go back to the book of Leviticus, there are prophecies that says God would be angry with Judah 7 times with the cities of Judah. And I'm already having to unpack something. Judah is not equal to Israel. The first time the word Jews is used in the King James Bible, you find the Jews at war with Israel because there were two nations. There was the nation of Israel and the nation of Judah. And the term Jews is associated with the southern kingdom of Israel called Judah, two separate nations at war. Similar in a sense to the Civil War in America, although we were one nation and states fighting against each other. And so this is just one reason biblical prophecies are difficult to unpack. There's so many things that the novice is completely clueless about. And when it's referring to this, that, or the other thing, you have to really get specific, really get diligent to fully understand what's going on. And the 70 years of anger against Judah are different from the 7 times 7 in Leviticus, which is 2,520 years. 2,520 years of God turning his back on the children of Jacob, Israel, and Judah. So I won't unpack the specifics here of Judah versus Israel versus Jerusalem. The point is, the Lord of hosts was angry and not showing mercy to Jerusalem for 70 years in this particular slice of history and prophecy, which is future history recorded in advance. And the Lord answered the angel who talked to me with good and comforting words. So the angel who spoke with me said to me, "Proclaim, saying, Thus says the Lord of hosts, I am zealous for Jerusalem and for Zion with great zeal." And now it flips. "I am exceedingly angry with the nations at ease." Judah was not at ease. God was angry with Judah. Judah was being punished and passed through the fire and measured and judged by God. But now his anger goes to the nations who during that period of time were at ease. "For I was a little angry against Judah, but they helped, but with evil intent." So the situation is that the nations that are fulfilling God's purpose and causing pain because of Judah's transigent ways and what they did with, through, and to the religion of God. But suddenly the nations that were part of that punishment were doing so with too much joy and even evil intent. So this is a fascinating sort of description of the geopolitical reality that is a backdrop to what's coming in Zechariah 4. God prophesied that both ancient Israel and ancient Judah, the twin nations of the descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the ancient Israelites, would be punished, as I mentioned, 2,520 years, until the end of the times of the Gentiles, which is another term that some of you may have heard of, but has incredible importance. Why? Because the times of the Gentiles ended on May 24th, 1844, a date which most Bahá'ís know about in a different context. Now, the evil intent of those nations prior to that and even after that has been increasing. Once the punishment ended on May 24th, 1844, the evil intent of the nations who weren't done punishing Judah grew. Let's go now to the second little section from Zechariah chapter 1, verses 12 to 17. "Therefore, thus says the Lord, I am returning to Jerusalem with mercy. My house shall be built in it, says the Lord of hosts, and a surveyor's line shall be stretched over Jerusalem. Now, a surveyor's line in modern terms is when you have to build a big building and you have to do the foundation, they come out with these instruments on tripods and they send lasers back and forth to measure that it's um square and what's the word, level. There's this term we used to use, I don't know if you guys are familiar with it, was is kind of a pejorative term about somebody. It's not a good term. Somebody would be said that they're a half a bubble off. What that means is the level's not quite level, and the bubble that shows that it's level would be off. This is similar to a plumb line. There's tools and instruments to make sure that it's absolutely level, absolutely square, so that you can get the foundation right. If you don't get the foundation right of even the most basic structure, it will collapse. We think of the Leaning Tower of Pisa. Think of the way modern skyscrapers not only have to have the right foundation and level, but they have to be built to withstand earthquakes. I was in an earthquake in Los Angeles when I was working for Deloitte Consulting, and I was on like the 27th floor. And all the buildings around me were like swaying in the wind like trees. And everyone was terrified because if that building went down and you're on the 27th floor, it doesn't matter. It's like the World Trade Center collapsing. So I knew that this could be it. And there was no point in running terrified. So I stood in front of the big plate glass windows because it was one of those big buildings where the windows. And I watched as these buildings swayed. It was like the most unbelievable moment. But those buildings had been constructed to withstand earthquakes, and they did. And when the earthquake was over, the building stopped, and I had had an amazing experience rather than death. Whereas others were, running for the elevators up and down. It was a chaotic moment. The point being here, you get the foundation right, or everything collapses. The surveyor's line will be stretched out over Jerusalem. The divine surveyor, the assayer of mankind, is now engaging. When the first telegraph message was sent on May 24th, 1844, it had this famous summary statement, which Baha'is are familiar with. What hath God wrought? Most Baha'is know this and cherish that knowledge and the awareness of some of the prophetic events that surround that telegraph message. But most Baha'is that I've met are unaware, dare I say, ignorant of the actual source of that quote, which is pulled from Numbers chapter 23:23. I find it fascinating that there was a declaration on May 23rd, and we're talking about the date 1844, and the quote is pulled from Numbers 23, verse 23, as if to double down or triple down on the importance of all this. But this verse is in the middle of an amazing 3-chapter prophecy that most students of prophecy don't even fully realize the importance of. I was a student of prophecy for many years, and I was aware of this. I'd read it many times, but for reasons I don't have time to explain, we did not consider it an important prophecy until I began investigating the Baha'i faith, and that verse, what hath God wrought, was brought to mind. So I immediately, of course, said, well, everybody says that comes from the Bible. And I went to look it up, and I was shocked. And suddenly this prophecy rose to monumental importance. And I was shocked that more Baha'is had not done this, in the same way that the term the gate of God in the Akkadian language is Bab El, and it refers to the Tower of Babel and Nimrod. And I've rarely met another Baha'i who's made this connection or who has bothered to study it. And half the time I've brought it up, they said, no, there's no connection between the Tower of Babel and the Bab. I'm like, really? How do you know that there's no connection? And so I spent 10 years studying into it to try to more fully understand, unpack, and melt that particular iceberg. And it's an iceberg for those who may not know much about the Baha'i faith and who may equate the goals and objectives of the Bab and Baha'u'llah, i.e., a new world order, one government, one language, and all the world in unity, they equate that with the Tower of Babel, which God said was confusion. And he, in this story, is the one who confused the languages and separated the people and caused disunity. This is why these things are an iceberg against which some ships will be made shipwreck unless we, with moderation and understanding, help integrate and make these connections with our Christian and Jewish and other friends. So here's what the whole verse of Numbers 23, verse 23 says. Surely there is no enchantment against Jacob, neither is there any divination against Israel. According to this time, in one obscure Bible translation, this verse starts out with from this day. Which day? May 24th, 1844. According to this time, it shall be said of, I'm sorry, this isn't in the verse, not the Bab and Baha'u'llah. According to this time, it shall be said of Jacob and of Israel, what hath God wrought? The people of Israel, ancient Israel, both Judah and Israel, the lost 10 tribes, the ones who are not known as Jews today, the ones who are lost to history, of which only a scattered remnant has returned to the Holy Land, and the people of Judah, who largely did retain their identity and are known as Jews. The people, the government, the nation, the modern nation of Israel is still being measured and purified. But let's not be confused. From this day, meaning May 24th, 1844, the days of their abasement were over. The times of the Gentiles ended, and their ascendancy is unfolding. I'd like to now bring in a quote from just a couple of days ago from the Universal House of Justice, the supreme body of the Bahá'í faith. This is the Rizvan message, which we just read at the celebration of Rizvan last night in our local community. And it's just an amazing letter. All the Baha'is of the world just eagerly await these messages every year. To the Baha'is of the world on Rizvan 2024, we are all too aware that the community of the greatest name, remember a few minutes ago we read the tablet of the greatest name? The community of the greatest name and the veils being ripped while also being concealed. The community of the greatest name cannot expect to be unaffected by the travails of society. And one of the major touch points, flash points, explosive danger points that the whole world is aware of course, the Middle East. We are all too aware that the community of the greatest name cannot expect to be unaffected by the travails of society. Yet, though it is affected by these travails, it is not confused by them. It is saddened by humanity's sufferings, but not paralyzed by them. Neither what's going on in the global scene, nor the forces ripping our nation apart, the divisive echo chambers of the right and the left, the blue and the red, and every other kind of social divide, the black and the white, the haves and the have-nots, all of these divisions, all of these identities and affiliations that are ripping our nation apart. The community of the greatest name cannot expect to be unaffected by them. Yet though it's affected, it is not confused. It is saddened, but not paralyzed. Heartfelt concern must prompt sustained effort to build communities that offer hope in place of despair, unity in place of conflict. In this same letter, the term unity and diversity is used, which coincidentally, is the foundation established by Hoshadar Matlach to preserve his legacy of writing books that reached out to diverse peoples of diverse religions. Shoghi Effendi described clearly how a process of, quote, progressive deterioration in human affairs, unquote. I love that phrase. I hate it in a way, but I love it. Progressive deterioration Because another great divide in this nation is the concept of progressive versus conservative. And I've seen evidence that we can be confused by these terms because of perhaps an attachment to the term progressive revelation. Progressive doesn't always mean the same thing in every context, dear friends. Here we have progressive deterioration in human affairs is occurring in parallel with another process, a process of integration through which the ark of human salvation, society's ultimate haven, is being built up. We rejoice to see in every country and region true practitioners of peace occupied with building this haven. All right, now let's jump right into Zechariah chapter 4. The vision of the lampstand and the olive trees. Zechariah chapter 4, verse 1. Now the angel who talked with me came back and wakened me. There are multiple angels in the book of Zechariah. Eileen Maddox goes in and explains this. The angel who talked with me came back and wakened me as a man who is wakened out of his sleep. That was me when I began to understand the ocean of revelation that I hadn't considered, which were the Bahá'í revelations. I remember sitting in an auditorium at Los Angeles when a singer, Devin Gundry, was singing. This always brings tears to my eyes. I give thanks to thee, O my God, that thou hast awakened me out of my sleep. A prayer for waking. And like an arrow through my heart, I realized that I had been asleep spiritually, that I had been content with the understanding I had and was failing to dig deeper. There was an entire ocean I was completely unaware of. And as I've described to some of my Baha'i friends, took a couple of years, but once I accepted it, I said, "Where's a helicopter? Let me in it. Take me out into the middle of that ocean." And I jumped out without a life jacket. Just let me immerse myself in the writings. I'm just beginning to scratch the surface of understanding all of this, and I'm just sharing with you what I'm learning. Now the angel who talked with me came back and wakened me as a man who is awakened out of his sleep. And he said to me, "What do you see?" So I said, "I am looking, and there is a lampstand of solid gold with a bowl on top of it. And on the stand, 7 lamps with 7 pipes to the 7 lamps." Now, Eileen Maddox in her book and other people have clarified that these 7 lamps are likely the 7 world religions, as well as the eyes of God, which are also in this passage going to and fro around the earth. But they all have pipes, channels from one common source to provide the light, just like other analogies about the vine and the branches that Jesus used, and which, of course, take on even greater significance in the Baha'i faith, that you have to be attached to the vine, and any branch that is cut off dies, withers up, and is thrown on the fire. You have to be attached to that true source. It doesn't matter which pipe, which bowl you're attached to. It can be Judaism, Christianity, Islam, the Baha'i faith. It doesn't matter, but you have to be attached to the source of the fuel for the light, the Holy Spirit. And then 2 olive trees are by it, one at the right of the bowl and the other at its left. And we've shared in the intro that these are also the 2 witnesses of the book of Revelation. We're not going to have time to get into that very much. Let me cover off on that point at a high level by saying incredibly important, dear friends, to understand all this, because there's, probably anywhere from 40 to 60 to 100 million Americans who care deeply about some of these things to varying degrees. I belong to a very zealous group that had churches in 120 countries that spent all of our time studying into this stuff and dedicated our entire life with such great zeal to understanding and following the word of God that it surpasses the zeal of many, many, many Baha'is that I've met. And that's not to disparage or necessarily compare, except that in their holy writings, it does say, "Vie ye with one another in service to the faith and in teaching the faith." So vie ye with one another does mean compete. So not to put anybody down, but just to be aware that the zeal of millions and millions of your fellow Americans in spiritual, religious endeavors equals or surpasses your own. Do not dismiss their zeal because their understanding is different from your own, but rather we have much to learn from each other. So I answered and spoke to the angel with me, saying, "What are these, my Lord?" Then the angel who talked with me answered and said to me, "Do you not know what these are?" And I said, "No, my Lord." Hey, it's no shame to admit that we're ignorant. It's no shame at all. Um, but we have to be able to admit it. We have to be able to say that there's a lot we don't know. Remember Daniel, the book of Daniel? The book of Daniel is what allowed William Miller and millions of people around the world to identify 1844 as an important date. Because William Miller studied the book of Daniel. And in the book of Daniel, it says, Daniel went to God and said, "What does all this mean?" It was all revealed to Daniel, and he didn't even understand what he was writing down. And God said, "Go thy way, Daniel. This is not for you. You get to write it, you don't get to understand it. It's for the time of the end. And at that time, knowledge will be increased, people will run to and fro, and the wise will understand." One of the reasons knowledge will be increased is because of the running to and fro, because of the reconnecting of peoples that were separated at the Tower of Babel. And going back even before that, or maybe not, I mean, maybe who knows what all that means. I'm still learning. But indigenous peoples all around the world have their own prophecies, and many of them, like the legend of Turtle Island, talks about how God gave certain covenants to them. And the different races, for example, were to protect the earth, one race, the water, a different race, and the air, a different race. And I believe the white race was to have the fire. I forget, off the top of my head. I'm not an expert in it. But God divided up the responsibility, the understanding, the awareness among the peoples of the earth. And it's part of almost a divine comedy of watching us try to get back together and share what we know and share what we understand. William Miller understood the timeline. He got to 1844, but as a result of that, we had the great disappointment because there were other things that he didn't understand. So now, already this long into the presentation, let me give a big caveat, and I can already see I'm not going to get through all the material. My first big caveat, which should have come at the beginning, but perhaps is better to come now, is there is no clergy in the Baha'i faith. I am a former minister who resigned, walked away from it, gave it up. I lay no claim to any kind of special knowledge, special station, special role. I am but a seeker. My opinions, my perspective as a Baha'i are just that, the opinions and perspectives of one Baha'i. Take them not only with a grain of salt, but apply an entire salt shaker. Each of us is unique and has a unique perspective and therefore unique and valuable gifts to offer. I happen to be both a Baha'i and a former Christian minister and administrator, pastor with a degree in biblical theology, who also had the privilege of working on the City of David archaeological expedition many, many years ago. So I studied biblical archaeology, and this led to a lifelong pursuit of digging deep. If you know what an archaeological tell is, it's mound upon mound upon mound upon mound of civilizations and cities that are burnt and attacked and turned to dust while something else is built on it. And James Michener's wonderful book, The Source, is a fictionalized sort of story of digging down into a tell and understanding everything that was going on with those peoples of the various civilizations that are underneath it all. That project was literally the City of David archaeological expedition was literally the uncovering of Zion, the holy mountain of God under David's reign, which gives me a unique vantage point, at least. And in my past life, I gave sermons in many different countries. I do speak multiple languages, and I counted 9 on my fingertips preparing for this different countries that I gave sermons in. Usually these were an hour to 90 minutes, sometimes to audiences of many thousands in different languages. Some of these were recorded and distributed globally. Now, why do I say this? Because of this next quote that I want to mention, which is from the Universal House of Justice from 2002. This is critically important to the context of what I'm saying, why I'm saying it, the plumb line in Zerubbabel's hand, why the people rejoice when they see it, and what we have to do about it. So this is from the message to the world's religious leaders in 2002 by the Universal House of Justice. The spiritual energy released from this message coincides with my awakening and my interest in the Baha'i faith. They published a book in 2004 called One Common Faith. And between 2004 and 2000, or it was 2005, 2006, every week for a year, I argued with Baha'is out in California because the oneness of religion, this Baha'i simple statement that all the religions are one was to me at that time the stupidest thing I'd ever heard. You're kidding me, right? You really believe all the religions are one? Don't you see what's happening? They're out there killing each other. ISIS arose and they're literally beheading people for believing different. And even today, we've got third world war brewing because of religious differences. And you're telling me that they're all one? What a joke. How stupid can you be? And they said, well, okay, but here's this book, One Common Faith. And I said, okay, conceptually, I can begin to accept that there might be one common faith. Let's look at this. And I argued with them every week for a year. And because some of those Baha'is were willing to admit when they were wrong, i.e., I said, hey, what you just told me is not what this book is saying. This body here, the Universal House of Justice, they just wrote this and it means this, not what you just said. Go back and check it out. They went back and did their research and they would come back and say, you, Mr. Non-Baha'i, who know nothing about the Baha'i faith, are right and we are wrong. Now, that's not to say I was proud of being right all the time, because half the time or more than half the time, I was the one that was wrong. Obviously, all the religions being one is not the stupidest thing ever said because Baha'u'llah said it and it's true. But you have to contextualize it. You have to unpack it. You have to melt that iceberg. So that's what this letter is doing here. And this is really important. This is such a monumental letter in terms of where we are right now in the evolution of humankind, the unfolding of prophecy, and where we are in that history that's written in advance. 2002, quote, the enduring legacy of the 20th century is that it compelled the peoples of the world to begin seeing themselves as the members of a single human race and the earth as that race's common homeland. My publishing company published a book called what is it called? Floating in Darkness by astronaut Ron Garan. And he talks about the Earthrise picture. The Earthrise picture is when the astronauts saw from heaven this glowing blue globe and the intense realization of the entire species that I almost said something that I'd have to excuse myself for, an expression. We are one people floating on this fragile little blue planet, and humankind got serious about solving its problems and becoming one because of the Earthrise. And that's what this is saying. The peoples of the world began seeing themselves as the members of a single human race and the earth as that race's common homeland. Despite the continuing conflict and violence that darken the horizon, prejudices that once seemed inherent in the nature of the human species are everywhere giving way. Down with them come barriers that long divided the family of man into a Babel. There's that word. I'm seeing some of the quotes and questions. There's that word Babel, confusion. The Tower of Bab, or the city of Bab El that Nimrod built, the gate of God, Bab El in the Akkadian language, the gate of God. God said it's Babel, it's confusion. And I don't have time to unpack that now, but my third book, The Rod of Iron, I think does a decent job at unpacking that and explaining it. Long divided the family of man into a babel of incoherent identities of cultural, ethnic, or national origin. That so fundamental a change could occur in so brief a period, virtually overnight in the perspective of historical time, suggests the magnitude of the possibilities for the future. Tragically, organized religion, whose very reason for being entails service to the cause of brotherhood and peace, behaves all too frequently as one of the most formidable obstacles in the path. That's what I was seeing when I was brought into contact with the Baha'i teachings. Exactly that. This issue comes sharply into focus when one considers what has been achieved elsewhere. Now, this is really important, especially for all the Baha'is here. The concept of the equality of the sexes has, for all practical purposes, now assumed the force of universally accepted principle. Let me read that again from the Universal House of Justice 20 years ago. In 2002, 20 years ago, they said the concept of the equality of the sexes has, for all practical purposes, now assumed the force of universally accepted principle. Check that box. Done. It doesn't mean there's not some work to be done in some dark corners of the world. But certainly in the enlightened modern Western civilizations, check that box, move on. The beleaguered battalions of nationalism face a similar fate. No one can mistake the fact that the fetish of absolute national sovereignty is on its way to extinction. Despite the histrionics and the perhaps attempts to turn us into playthings of the ignorant around this topic, the Universal House of Justice in 2002 said it's on its way to extinction. And now here's another really important point. Racial and ethnic prejudices have been subject to equally summary treatment by historical processes that have little patience left for such pretensions. Here, rejection of the past has been especially decisive. On the subject of racial and ethnic prejudices, historical processes have left little patience for such pretensions. Here, rejection of the past has been especially decisive. It might feel really good to jump on that bandwagon, to jump on that tide that has been rolling by those who want to be on the right side of this historical process and denigrate, label, shame, and blame people who supposedly are on the other side of that historical process. It might feel really good. But the Universal House of Justice is saying on that front, while work must still be done, check that box. Our goal is not to emphasize the differences and the problems of challenges. Our goal is to be the force of integration, not align with the forces of disintegration that are using this tide of acknowledgement, acceptance of the flow of history to further attack, destroy, and fragment the fabric of society. But now here's the real important point of this whole message here and the plumb line. As the 20th century opened, the prejudice that seemed more likely than any other to succumb to the forces of change was that of religion. Alas, it is clear that these initiatives, those that seek to unite religion, these initiatives lack both intellectual coherence and spiritual commitment. Dear friends, it is exactly that that is the purpose of this message today and a lot of the work of Something or Other Publishing, the Royal Falcon Press, the Royal Falcon Foundation that we're involved in, and Eileen's books, The Coming of the Glory, is to provide intellectual coherence, to melt some of those icebergs in ways that have been difficult and challenging even for Baha'is to do. In contrast to the process of unification that are transforming the rest of humanity's social relationships, the suggestion that all of the world's great religions are equally valid in nature and origin is stubbornly resisted by entrenched patterns of sectarian thought. Now, I've explained a little bit of how me and my tribes, right, those religions, and I was a religious leader, as I mentioned, have biases and prejudices against some of the teachings of the Baha'i faith. But the main and biggest challenge that I see, and I'm going to conclude with this in the interest of time, are a failure of the Baha'is to recognize these three quotes among many others. Here are three quotes, Baha'i quotes on the topic of the Word of God. This is from Abdul Baha, The Promulgation of Universal Peace. You must know the Old and New Testaments as the Word of God. This is from The Promised Day Has Come by Shoghi Effendi. The divine inspiration of the gospel is fully recognized. And this powerful one that only came to my attention this year, 2024, I'd never seen it before. I know why, because Baha'is don't really like to focus on this for some reason. The Bible, at least the ones that I've met, perhaps many of you do like to focus on this. The Bible and the Gospels are most honored in the estimation of all Baha'is. It is the religious duty of every Baha'i to read and comprehend the meanings of the Old and New Testament. Abdul Baha, Star of the West, volume number 14. 100 years ago, March 1924, the religious duty. How well are we doing, dear friends, in performing this religious duty? What is our responsibility in the failure to achieve religious unity? The challenge that the Universal House of Justice in 2002 said was continuing to be a problem for the world. Well, when I gave my first fireside in my local area, after I mustered the courage and prepared it and began to invite some friends that I thought might be open to it, and I ended with Q&A, the first person that stood up was a well-respected longtime Baha'i who'd been on the NSA, excuse me, on the LSA, no, the NSA of Alaska, because it was an NSA, right? And a person I love and generally admire and respect, interestingly of Jewish background. He stood up and said, the Bible's just a book full of myths. Let yourself sit with that for a moment. You went to all this effort to prepare a fireside to invite a lot of seekers and try to interest them in deepening in the Word of God. And because I was spending so much time in the Bible, he felt it necessary to say, the Bible is just a book full of myths. Now, what do I do? Start arguing with him in front of everybody? Well, if we do, we know that both are wrong if you argue. Years later in the same community, a young person, I think she was 15 at the time, born a Baha'i, both parents Baha'is, raised a Baha'i, multi-generations, was talking to my daughter, who was born a Baha'i, barely, because we declared right before she was born, about discussing religion in school. And this friend said, well, I just tell people I don't believe in Adam and Eve because of the debates, right, about religion. I'm like, really? You don't believe in Adam? Wasn't he a manifestation of God? Doesn't denying a manifestation mean that you've denied them all? But out of whatever social convenience, you just say, I don't believe in Adam and Eve. And furthermore, well, anyway, I'll just stop there. So these things exist out there because we're not aware of these quotes and this religious duty. So I have so much more to say, but I'm going to end it here. I'm just going to share one image here. It's a very general image because I want everyone here to know that I consider you friends. And when I raise these somewhat difficult, painful topics, it's an exhortation to be more open to and more diligent with and to devote some time and energy to studying and understanding the Old and New Testament. I guess what I will say about that Adam and Eve thing is that the reason um, the Jews rejected Jesus is because many of them didn't know their own scriptures well enough. And the reason the Christians couldn't embrace Islam is because they had rejected the Old Testament and they couldn't being an expansion religion and an outward looking religion and preaching love and spreading the gospel. They made such a severe and clean, if you will, break with Judaism that when the plumb line was held up against their religion and they were summoned to the book of Revelation, chapter 12, which says they had the law of God and the testimony of Jesus Christ, while they were convinced that the law had been nailed to the cross. Right. So I'm just going to, and that's an oversimplification as is much of what I've been sharing with you today. But I'm just going to try to share my screen real quick and just share one simple image. And here it is, the plumb line. The plumb line in the hand of the divine assayer of mankind. I don't think we even got to it in my overambitious biting off more that I could choose series of my notes, but it says that the people rejoiced when they saw the plumb line in the hand of Zerubbabel. And Eileen Maddox, in her book, I had quotes from that, explains beautifully how the plumb line, among other things, is designed to measure and refine the religion. It also plumbs the depth of the water, right? A plumb line shows us how deep the water is? Are we, playing in a shallow kiddie pool of water that frankly smells of chlorine and diapers? I had 2-year-olds, and when we'd go on vacation and we'd spend time in the kiddie pool, it wasn't a pleasant situation for the adults. The kids didn't mind, right? Every religion has typically had gatekeepers. You could call them priests or ministers or whoever that sort of cordons off the water and lays claim to it, begins to define doctrine and dogma and interpretations and understanding. And I referred to that cordoning off of the water of the ocean into a small segment. It says this is what it is, as the kiddie pool. Um, there's an ocean of revelation, especially in the West, where we have hundreds of millions of Christians, dear friends. We need to all, with them, study the Word of God. These communities that we're supposed to be building and reaching the third milestone, it's really only going to be possible when we embrace the ocean, the Word of God. And when we stop trying to force people to join our section of the ocean, however big, however deep, or however small and however shallow, the ocean of God's revelation is huge. Don't be afraid of those icebergs. We can explore them together. We can traverse around them together. To the degree that we can melt the coldness of those icebergs, that we can melt the coldness of the hearts of those veils that need to be ripped asunder with fire and burnt with fire. We have to do that together. We'll never do it just as Baha'is walking around with our possibly spiritual superiority, thinking we have all the answers because we've looked at the back of the book. But maybe we don't really know how to do the math. And guess what? They may not either, but together we can figure out these complex problems. So I had so much more to say, tons more notes, but I'm probably already over time, and I'll just stop there. And thank you for your patience and the opportunity to speak with you today. And if we still have time, I'm happy to jump into some questions and answers. Speaking of which, I think I'm supposed to just go in and do so. The host told me earlier. So um, please, can you post the names of these authors? Hopefully, Jeremiah or John, you can do that. Bob L., how does the connection work, from Sandra? Again, in brief, Nimrod built a city called Bob L., Gate of God. But then he built a tower, which, to oversimplify, was self-aggrandizement. That was his version of the kiddie pool, right? His version of the kiddie pool was to take this idea that he clearly had. He had some understanding that there would be a gate of God that would unite all mankind, but he perceived himself as the one doing it. So he built a tower that is both imposing and began to try to rule in fear and dominate people. I also have explained in my book, The Rod of Iron, how in this, again, I like to think in terms of geopolitics and what is God doing on earth and where are we at in prophecy. The space race between the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, which was a godless experiment in communism, which is identified as a false god by the Guardian, or a false idol, I forget which exactly. And the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, which is a dominant, forceful, coercive union of nations, which I was personally able to witness the collapse of. I was in Leningrad at the time Gorbachev was abducted, as the wall was coming down, because I was stationed in Germany and I was serving as the pastor of the church in Estonia, among other things. I got to see that firsthand. But on the other hand, you have the United States of America, one nation under God. So you have these two competing models performing a space race to do what? Build the tower to heaven, which is what the Tower of Babel signifies. So in this day and age, the US president in 1963, which coincides, of course, with the establishment of the Universal House of Justice, said before this decade is out, we will reach the moon. And the Tower to Heaven was built. Because in the United States, peoples of all nations, creeds, identities, races Now, not all of them were brought, not all of them came here voluntarily. You did have the indigenous nations that were conquered and representatives from Africa who were brought here against their will. But pray tell, how else would they have gotten here? I'm not condoning it. But this nation was one nation under God. One of the quotes that I had here is from Baha'u'llah saying, the signs of his revelation have appeared in the east, and the signs of his dominion have appeared in the west. And at the time when Baha'u'llah declared who he was, 1863, his dominion was evident because the United States of America, one nation under God, immediately sprang into action to fight a civil war to abolish slavery, for which Abdul Baha praises the white men who gave their lives in a war in which more people died than all the other combined wars combined for this country. So all of these things play into that. And again, this Rizvan message about us not being confused by the stuff around us requires us to dig deep into all of these things. And again, I have no authority. These are my ideas, my opinions. I could be so wrong. Well, then come, let us reason together. Let's talk about it if you think I'm wrong, because we can both learn something. I don't know if that helps, Sandra, or if that makes it worse. um, Zerubbabel, yeah, let me just put that name in the chat. Somebody else probably already did it. Somebody else has already did it. Thank you, Eileen. In the context of the current war, Numbers 23:23, go back and read Numbers chapter 22, 23, and 24. You will see that Balak, the king of Moab, asked a prophet of Israel to curse Israel, and he offered a treasure for doing so. Balaam wanted that treasure. So, over an epic story in which they climb up 3 separate mountains and create altars and offer sacrifices to God, in Balaam's effort to get that treasure, God tells him to bless Israel instead of cursing Israel. And these 3 successive blessings get more and more powerful, angering the king of Moab. And the first blessing is basically that Israel will be established and nothing will harm her, which is what happened between 1844 and 1944. Of course, the people of Israel were seriously harmed in World War II, the Holocaust. But again, in my view, this is because after the Kitabi Akdas was revealed on the Mount Carmel, and I've been to that spot where Baha'u'llah revealed the Tablet of Carmel, where there's an obelisk. I was on my first pilgrimage. That spot shook me. I was moved emotionally on that spot. I had no idea why. I only learned all this stuff after having that experience. But that's where Baha'u'llah revealed the Tablet of Carmel, in which he says, and I'll summarize, call out to Zion, O Carmel. Hasten you to circumambulate. Beware lest you delay. Well, they delayed. They did not come under the shelter of the geography established by the plumb line. Remember, the plumb line establishes the corners of the border and that the foundation is square. It establishes the boundaries of the land to be surveyed, in addition to the depth, the purity, the levelness of it. And it was only after the Holocaust that the nation of Israel was established. But if you go through that prophecy and look at the successive curses and the successive blessings, this will begin to unfold. This is not the kind of thing that we can get into great depth on publicly. There's great risk in doing so. It's a geopolitical question. We've got Bahá'ís in many countries who are at risk. Should we begin to get involved politically? But you would do well to go look at Numbers 22, 23, and 24 and begin to understand them in the context of all these other prophecies. Thank you. How did I find the faith? Wow. On the first time I saw the word Baha'i was a little sign pointing up a dirt road up in Alaska where I was a student. And I was a troubled child, a victim of kidnapping. I later ended up living in a tent for 10 months. Some of you know my stories. That's why I wrote a trilogy. I had an incredibly troubled childhood, but I remembered somehow this little sign that said Bahá'í Center. And at that time, I was probably 14. I imagined that it was a bunch of hippies up there having free sex and doing drugs. And I'm not joking, because at that time I was into the Beatles and music and mind expanding drugs. Not that I had access to them, but I wanted to. And Hare Krishna, I somehow that was the impression I got. But I got out of that, went and studied theology, biblical archaeology, and I ended up on the City of David archaeological expedition. So now I'm on a boat from Athens to Haifa, and the first thing I see is the mountain of my idol Elijah, who called down fire from heaven and slaughtered 400 prophets of Baal. But coming from Alaska, I knew what a mountain was, and that was just a little hill. So I was greatly disappointed. And I asked my professor, I was standing on the deck, and he knew I was the most eager student, so eagerly wanting to see the Holy Land more than any of my peers, because I was always a zealot because of those horrible experiences as a child. I wanted God, and God had saved me. There's a lot of other stories I could tell that I don't have time for. He said, "Well, yeah, that's Mount Carmel. Like that little hill is Mount Carmel. What is that mosque doing on it? Because a mosque was symbolic of satanic religion in my mind back then." He said, "That's not a mosque. That's the world center of the Baha'i faith." And I said, "Those hippies from Alaska, what are they doing in Israel?" And it was 20 years later, after many more difficult circumstances led me to even greater humility. And I don't have a ton of humility, I'll confess. The greatest veil is knowledge, and I like to study, I like to understand. It can lead to arrogance. But in my efforts at humility, which sometimes fail, God blesses me with circumstances that drive me to humility. And at that point in time, well, of course, there was a woman involved. She was investigating the Baha'i faith while I was interested in investigating her. And in order to become friends with her, I had to pretend that I was interested in this weird religion. That's the short story. And then 2 years later, out in Los Angeles, I was hit like a bolt of lightning. As I said, that song, um, I give praise to the oh my God that was awakened me out of my sleep. That was kind of the spiritual beginning. There's a lot more to it. I spent a lot of time in India. But then reading The Child of the Covenant, some of these things finally began to click, and I realized Baha'u'llah was who he said he was. Um, so going back through, how does one reconcile Hindu gods to the one God? That is a great question. I am no expert, but I just mentioned I was in India, right? And while I was in India, I had this unbelievable experience at Tiruvannamalai, which is the Red Mountains, and it's a holy place. And the car that we were in, and I was baptizing people in an AIDS village. This was another really low point. I got very sick, and I was actually terrified of dying at that point. This was in 1998, 99, something like that, 2000, 2001, I forget. And the car broke down. I was stuck sleeping outside this outdoor gas station car repair shop where they were waiting to get a place for the car. And I didn't speak the language at all. I'd never been further off the grid and more like out on a limb, but I was pursuing God wherever he was, and that's where he led me. And suddenly in the middle of the night, while I'm in fitful sleep, already knowing I'm getting very sick from having been in water I should never have been in, baptizing people, um, in India, in backwater India, suddenly the whole city was up circumambulating the mountain at Tiruvannamalai. And I'm in the asteroid belt of three-wheeled taxis and parents with kids on bicycles, all celebrating this new moon celebration in backwater Tiruvannamalai, India. That had some kind of mystic experience on me. And what I later came to realize about Hinduism, which I had also thought, man, these people are at the very bottom of the barrel of satanic deception. Look at the misery in this country from worshiping all these false gods. I personally came to an understanding that it's just their version of talking about the qualities and the names of God, that they actually believe, in one sense, they have a deeper understanding of one God and the oneness of God than we do, but they're coming at it from the other side of the coin. And so, again, we must approach these religions and these beliefs and these people with the utmost respect and love. We must invite them and ask them to explain themselves and share their faith with us. And by the way, I do this every Tuesday night on the Created in the Image of God show, which is live streamed, in which I invite religious leaders and people of faith to explain and share their perspective on things. And my goal, my fantasy is that this is helpful to Baha'is in getting down off our own high horse about our own awareness. Because remember, the most grievous veil is knowledge. There is no more privileged person on earth, if you want to talk about privilege, than a Baha'i. So let's lay down our privilege. Let's stop acting from privilege, the privilege of the most precious knowledge. Getting back to those opening quotes from the Tablet of the Greatest Names. I'll just conclude with this one quote, which I'll mangle. There's a quote by Baha'u'llah which says something like, "Great peace and contentment have those who have passed beyond the sea of names to the shores of contentment." And the Bab and Baha'u'llah are also names. Approaching the one great God, whatever lamp in the candlestick, the flow of oil is from that same source. John, Jeremiah, I don't know if we have any more time to take any questions that somebody wants to pose verbally or where we're at in this, but I'll try to stop there.
Yeah, I think we're in a good spot to finish for today, unless there's something that is burning in one's heart. It's been a very good presentation. We really appreciate it that you're able to spend time with us, go over your own journey, some thoughts you have, and more importantly, that there's these places in the Bible one can pick up right now, read, and really get in touch with the essence of the prophecies we're talking about. It's not
John,
just a reference.
John, isn't it what it is UK time is supposed to be as 5 o'clock or 4 o'clock?
I'm sorry. It's 12:21 p.m. here. I don't know what time it is in the United Kingdom.
No, that's the thing, because I thought, because it translated my time, I thought it was going to be 5 to 7, at 7 after that is Shoghi Effendi. I'm sorry to be late. I
Well, no,
apologize because I just misunderstood. I'm very sorry.
it's fine. It's fine. It's 12:22 p.m. here. We're going to be having in an hour and a half a class about Shoghi Effendi. We have Dear Violetta
That's
Zane
right.
every Sunday at 2 p.m. Yes. It's
7 o'clock.
Eastern Daylight Time. Yes.
Yeah, but this session that we just missed, wasn't it supposed to be at the 5 o'clock UK time?
If it's 5 hours difference, it
So
would be
let's say it was 11. So 11, if you add 5 hours.
That'd be 4 your time. Yes.
Oh, I made a mistake. Sorry about that.
Well,
Sorry.
the beautiful thing for all of you joining on YouTube and Facebook, you already know this. However, for us on Zoom, this is recorded on YouTube and Facebook. So you're very welcome to please share this video. If you liked this video, please hit the like button below. And if you want to leave a comment, please do so. For those of you on Zoom, please go to Clearwater Bahá'ís, the YouTube channel. Of course, the Facebook page for the Baha'i Center of Clearwater is also available. It has these videos posted there. So we appreciate it that you joined us all the way from the United Kingdom. Thank you for being here with us today. And for all of you who have joined us here from Florida, and of course Wade, our guest speaker, we thank all of you for coming and being with us to explore the Bible in this unique way and to explore prophecy. And like I said earlier, it's a very important place to get started, to read the text for yourself, come into a bigger connection to it. You know, it's funny, if you look up the word Nimrod in the Baha'i writings, if you go to oceanlibrary.com, Baha'u'llah has quite a bit to say about Abraham and Nimrod and what transpired between the two, which this will be my question for all of you, if you can find that and actually discover it for yourself. So oceanlibrary.com to open the book, the Bible, the Baha'i writings, other religious scripture. oceanlibrary.com. If you go there, you can also download the app on your phone for Ocean 2.0 Interfaith Reader. So Wade, again, we
John,
thank you so much.
John, allow me to just end with one very brief quote from the Bible. This is to me one of the most powerful references to Baha'u'llah in the Bible that, again, many people don't know about. And this is the very last sermon that I gave. Years after I resigned, I was invited to go back to Estonia. I mentioned my time there to celebrate at this 8-day festival. And I gave a sermon to try to reach people who I was somewhat estranged from. I had actually left the church that invited me back because I was well respected, even though differences and schisms were occurring in that global denomination. And the Tower of Babel, this has so much interest to me. But I gave a sermon on this passage from Matthew 25. I had no idea. I was beginning to understand the Baha'i faith, but I had not even made the connection yet. I declared it's a Baha'i probably 8 or 10 months later. But anyway, it's from Matthew 25, verses 31 to 32. Matthew 25, verses 31 to 32. When the Son of Man shall come in his glory. It doesn't get more specific than that, friends, if you want to understand Baha'u'llah's role on the world scene. When the Son of, what he does with that plumb line, when that's held in his right hand and the mountains are leveled and they become as a plain before Zerubbabel. When the Son of Man shall come in his glory and all the holy angels with him, then shall he sit upon the throne of his glory, and before him shall be gathered all nations, and he shall separate them one from another, as a shepherd divides his sheep from the goats. And in the Christian world, we always took that as meaning some kind of a personal individual thing. But that's not what it's talking about at all. It's talking about the divine order, how the plumb line separates and judges the nations based on their behavior. And just to tease you almost in a snippet, in 1948, not only was the nation of Israel established, but the Universal Declaration of Human Rights was adopted by the United Nations. And you can go and look up what's in that document and correlate it with what comes next in the book of Matthew and how the sheep and the goats are determined. But the fascinating thing is that neither the sheep nor the goats even recognized him. Both the sheep and the goats said to the Son of Man when he came in his glory, what do you mean I gave you a glass of water? What do you mean I visited you in prison? What do you mean I didn't clothe you? What do you mean I didn't visit you when you were sick? I never saw you. Both the sheep and the goats said that. But as we know, it's deeds of stainless purity that count.
Thank you very much for sharing those final words, Wade. That hopefully will sit with everyone in a way that allows for inspiration and, again, a call to that stainless purity in one's acts. So there was a question, and I'll finalize this. There was a question of where do we find Wade's books. You can go to soopllc.com, SOOPLLC.com, and you can find Wade's books on that website. And there are quite a few scholars, quite a few authors, quite a few people who have decided to take up the mantle of investigation and share that with others. So it's welcome if you wish to visit the website. If you rewind the video on YouTube, we put up a special offer for one of the authors, Miss Eileen Maddox, and we welcome you to please check out this video, go back to the beginning, and please use that code to get a special discount. With that being said, we welcome all of you to join us again next Sunday. And as this is a time of prophetic fulfillment with the Festival of Ridwan, we celebrate with you, one and all, the declaration of Baha'u'llah over these 12 days in this beautiful festival. We hope that in whatever community you are, that you're celebrating, and that your 9th day of Rizwan coming up next weekend will also be very much full of joy and happiness. Have a beautiful Sunday, everyone. Again, thank you, Wade.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for all the support that we get from the Clearwater Bahá'ís. It's